More big layoffs coming from staffing firm Indeed, in what might be the most fitting corporate announcement of 2024 so far. When the people who are supposed to help you find a job find they don't have one themselves, that's not a good sign for the economy. It's more critical evidence that the US labor market is indeed struggling. Consumer confidence has tanked, the labor data has weakened, and there's more. Today, the Federal Reserve Bank of New York reported, quote, an increasing number of borrowers missed credit card payments, revealing worsening financial distress among some households. Now, that's a direct quote from the New York Fed branch. And it's not just among some households. We're getting signals of late cycle behavior and trends coming in from all sides and in all categories. While Jay Powell and the rest of the media are all over inflation risks and the strong economy narrative, one that consumers aren't buying because they can't even if they wanted to, consumers are out of options. They're behind on their loans and they see no way out from the supposedly booming jobs market that they know is a complete sham. So we'll start with Indeed. The company announced another 1,000 layoffs, or about 8% of their workforce. And they had laid off about 2,200 people last year, and it's basically the same story. The corporate press release said this, a note from the CEO, Chris Hyams. Last year, we were facing a global slowdown in hiring, which led to multiple consecutive quarters of revenue loss. We reduced our headcount, instituted multiple cost-saving measures, and instilled investment discipline across the company. These measures worked, and we are now operating with stable profitability. Okay, however, while the global economy has improved in several areas over the past year, we are not yet set up for sustainable growth. Despite our efforts so far, our organization is still too complex. We still have significant duplication of effort and too many organizational layers that slow down decision making. We have been working to simplify every aspect of our business, but without meaningful change, we can't get where we need to go. What they're really saying here, the CEO, we hired way too many people expecting 2021 to continue forever, and after losing money for several quarters, we got rid of a whole bunch of people, but it wasn't actually enough because we don't really see any pickup, especially in the US. That's what the statement actually says. And it's no wonder. We keep seeing this theme all over the place. We come back to this time and again, especially in the most recent data. I just talked about the University of Michigan's consumer confidence tanked by the most in a single month in its 46-year history. The primary reason wasn't consumer prices. The primary reason was people suddenly talking to University of Michigan researchers and saying, we're afraid of losing our job. We don't see a whole lot that's positive about this economy. So the consumer confidence number fell sharply, while the number of people saying they fear employment or really fear unemployment goes way up. Same thing as Indeed. It wasn't just that one. The Conference Board consumer confidence number fell to its lowest in several years in its latest number. Again, the same concerns came up. Jobs and incomes. Consumers are worried about their own financial situation because after being pummeled with price increases the last couple of years, wage growth, income growth has not kept up, and it doesn't look like it's going to catch up anytime soon. That's the part that people are picking up on. If the labor market was really robust, as consumer price pressures come down somewhat, and they are coming down in these surveys, as I'll get to later, as consumer price pressures come down, you think if the labor market was robust, consumers would say, okay, now we're seeing it. Now incomes are going to catch up to where prices are and we can be made whole. But instead, more and more consumers are saying we're already way behind and we're going to get further behind because we don't see the strong labor market. In fact, we're more afraid that the labor market's going to get weaker before we ever get close to catching up. Part of that process while trying to catch up and trying to make up the difference between prices and lagging incomes, especially in real terms, that has been about debt, credit cards in particular. Today, the Federal Reserve Bank of New York released the results of its household debt and credit report for the first quarter of 2024, and there was some eye-opening statistics in there. In a Liberty Street Economics blog post that accompanied the release of the report, it said this: the share of maxed out borrowers has been increasing from pandemic lows and is approaching pre-pandemic levels, and the delinquency transition rates of these maxed out borrowers are now noticeably higher than pre-pandemic, resulting in higher transition rates into credit card delinquency overall. And that's kind of understating the results of the findings here. For a positive improvement in credit card delinquency, we would need to see the delinquency transition rate among maxed out borrowers begin to decline and or the share of maxed out borrowers to fall. So far, the data show neither of those trends moving in the right direction. In fact, they're moving decidedly in the wrong direction. And if these trends continue and other factors influencing delinquencies remain the same, credit card delinquencies are likely to continue to rise. And that risks a whole bunch of stuff, including the banking system, which has been supplying minimal amounts of consumer credit, and credit overall might say, yeah, we're done here. We've seen enough. While banks have already cut back to their commercial and industrial borrowers, they have been somewhat willing to still lend in terms of consumer loans, non-revolving loans as well as revolving loans. But there are signs that banks are getting a little bit averse when it comes to consumer loans too. And the rising, especially transition into serious delinquency that these numbers from the Federal Reserve Bank of New York are picking up on are not going to make banks want to continue supplying credit into the real economy, crunching even more the credit crunch that has already been developing over the last year. Now, as far as the numbers go, new delinquent balances where payments are 30 days or more behind, according to the Federal Reserve Bank of New York's numbers for credit cards in the first quarter, the total 30 days or more was 8.93%, which is up from 8.52% in the fourth quarter. And it had been less than half of that in the fourth quarter of 2021. So once again, we see early 2022 is the transition period, that technical recession that wasn't actually a technical recession, was the economy transitioning from the upside, the supply shocks positive part, which everybody confused with the actual recovery, into the downside. For credit cards that are seriously delinquent, which are 90 days or more since of missed payments, we're talking about 6.86% in the first quarter of 2024, which is up sharply from the fourth quarter by almost half a percentage point. In fact, it is half a percentage point. And that had been 3.04% in the first quarter of 2021. Now, 6.86% in the most recent data, that's equal to around the second quarter of 2011. So we're talking about the highest in over 10 years. And second quarter of 2011 is coming down from the Great Recession, which is not a good comparison to be making. And if we look at the data from on the way up into the Great Recession, it's about equivalent to the first quarter of 2008, already into the official Great Recession period. So like I said, credit card delinquencies, or really the transition into the delinquencies, what they're measuring here, is showing signs that look a lot like recession type of behavior. And among those signals, as the Liberty Street blog post already pointed out, is maxed out borrowers. Maxed out borrowers who have basically no other options. Their incomes aren't keeping up. Their expenses continue to go up. They don't see another job opportunity that they can go after. They don't get the raise that they thought they were going to get, whatever the case may be. The economy is conspiring against them. So they max out their credit cards because they don't have any alternative. That's late cycle behavior. And the real late cycle behavior is when those maxed out credit card borrowers start missing payments. They've already borrowed as much as they possibly can. And as they miss payments, that's a key critical warning that the economy is indeed transitioning, because too many of these consumers are being left behind, and now they're so far behind they really don't have any alternative but to begin the default process. As the New York Fed's statement said, missed credit card payments are caused by many factors ranging from forgetfulness to cash flow constraints and income loss. Most of these are difficult to predict or observe in individual level credit data. However, one observable factor that is strongly correlated with future delinquencies is a high credit card utilization rate. While borrowers who were current on all their cards in the first quarter of 2024 had a median utilization rate of 13% in the previous quarter, those who became newly delinquent had a median rate of 90%. This makes sense, since using practically all of your available credit could indicate a tight cash flow situation. Indeed, credit utilization is a key input in credit scores, which are intended to measure the probability of future default. So that's all. That's what all the numbers are showing from the Federal Reserve's report. Lots of maxed out consumers. And of those maxed out consumers, a high proportion are transitioning into delinquency, which then gets at the risk of default. And they're only going to come out of delinquency, short of default, if something picks up materially in the economy. As the Federal Reserve pointed out, that's another factor that can change delinquency rates and transitions to stop it from transitioning all the way. That's if the economy picks up. But we continue to get more and more signals suggesting that it's not picking up. It's actually getting worse. And that's the reason why so many consumers are maxed out on their credit cards and are now becoming more and more delinquent. Late stage cycle behavior. And it's not just consumer credit loans or credit card loans, it's also auto loans. Auto loans have become a huge portion of overall credit for consumers and households. In fact, as of the latest data that just came out from the Federal Reserve Bank of New York, they see 1.62 trillion in total auto loans outstanding. That's more than credit cards. That's a lot more than credit cards. And in the auto loan category, they see those that are 30 plus days delinquent. The rate's there at 2.78% as of the latest quarter, up a little bit from the fourth quarter, but again, 2.78%. That's the highest since 2010, the second quarter of 2010, coming out of the Great Recession. 2.78 is equivalent to the second quarter of 2008. It's more than during the pre-crisis period, or the pre-crisis, pre-2008 period. So we're seeing auto loans start to fall further and further behind too, which is, again, a consistent signal of late stage cycle behavior, only fitting with all of the rest of the indications that we keep getting. Incomes aren't keeping up. Prices on necessities, non-discretionary items go up because of oil prices, non-economic reasons, insurance. People can't afford these costs, and it's forcing them into all of these alternatives, and they're running out of alternatives. That's the final signal that we've been waiting for. And as they run out of alternatives, it just leads to more second and third order weakening effects all throughout the rest of the economy as well. I do want to note one final point here from the report on household credit from the Fed. Home equity lines of credit have been increasing over the last year despite higher interest rates because of the same reason. In this one, it's kind of flipping everything around. Borrowers are borrowing from their home equity lines because prices have gone up, but also because of the same reason. They're sort of, instead of maxing out their credit cards, they're tapping into their home equity because incomes are not keeping up. The economy isn't good. And home equity lines of credit have apparently been somewhat of a lifeline to a lot of people to maintain their level of spending. So the danger is if borrowers are getting to the end of whatever they can tap into, but more so that, as I mentioned before, what if banks start to say, nah, we've had enough. It doesn't matter what it is, we don't really want to lend because delinquencies are rising and maybe we have to reserve more for potential losses. And so we have to cut back on the amount of credit that we're going to extend in all of these lines. It's another signal that consumers are not getting what they want or what they need from income. Economic pressures continue to be too much, forcing them into alternate means just to keep level, just to make ends meet. Given this type of background, it's understandable why, despite all of the media stories about resurgent inflation pressures, consumers aren't seeing it. Recent survey data shows unequivocally they're not seeing resurgent inflation. Quite the opposite. We got data also from the Federal Reserve Bank of New York earlier this week, consumer price expectations. According to that survey, consumer price expectations 1 year ahead, the median was about 3.26% for April, which was up a little bit from March. March and the 4 months before April had been around 3%. So again, there's the narrative about sticky prices, and then they go up to 3.26%. But that's just what consumers are seeing as far as energy costs and some of the other short-run factors that hit into not just consumer price measures, but into their consumer budgets. So 3.26% median, it might be up from the last 4 months around 3%, but it's nowhere near where it was last year when prices were ticking up. For example, the median 1 year look ahead had been 3.6% in September. So substantially lower than September, even though energy costs and some of these other costs are higher now than they were back last year. So consumers are seeing less potential for price increases, even though prices right now are increasing, because they understand the small e economic difference. And we can also see that in longer run expectations too. The 3-year looking ahead period, 3-year price expectations, that median fell to 2.76% in April from 2.9% in March. So longer term expectations from Federal Reserve Bank of New York continue to be incredibly tame. Whatever consumers are seeing in the short run, they consider it to be just short run issues. Same for the University of Michigan. The University of Michigan's 1-year expectation, that one jumped to 3.5% from 3.2%, reflecting again the current consumer price environment, from everything from energy prices to insurance and everything else. And everybody jumped on that 3.5%. Oh, here we come. Resurgent inflation pressures. But again, when oil prices and gasoline prices were rising last year, the 1-year expectation for the University of Michigan got up to 4.5%, a full percentage point higher than what we see now. Consumers are seeing even less of a potential for consumer prices over the year ahead today than they were 6 months ago. And again, the long run expectation, the 5-year expectation from the University of Michigan, while that ticked up to 3.1% from 3.0%, it's still in the same general range as the last couple years, and really going back to the pre-pandemic era too. Consumers aren't seeing inflation risks because they have all of these other things on their mind. Everyone in the media, central bankers, officials, politicians, they're all talking about inflation risk, consumer price risks that consumers themselves don't see. And it's not any reason why they don't see it. They're preoccupied with the economy as it actually is, worried about losing their job, worried about incomes trying to catch up to where they had been, spending on their credit cards because they don't have any other choice, drawing down on home equity lines of credit, and becoming more delinquent from some of these borrowings because they don't have those options. And the reason they don't have any other options, the labor market. The labor market is indeed struggling, and consumers know it. That's why confidence has gone down. That's why consumer spending has been somewhat softer, especially going back to last fall. And it's why the economy is not in danger of inflation. It is much weaker than most people anticipate. On a small e economic basis, consumers understand the situation in a way that policymakers don't seem able to. The economy sucks, and it is leaving too many people behind, and it's leaving more and more people behind on top of those that have already been left behind. And that's not going to change anytime soon. It's not going to become more inflationary. Instead, we get all of these signals of late stage cycle behavior because at the end of the day, this is still an economic cycle. Indeed, it actually is. Given what we're seeing here in credit card delinquency borrowing data, no wonder we're seeing indications from the services economy tank like the ISM. Went into those details at the video link below. As always, I thank you very much for joining me. Huge thank you, Eurodollar University members and subscribers. And until next time, take care.